Okay, it's all yours, Janielle.
Perfect. So hi, everyone. I'm Janielle, and I'll be talking to you about how I use different microscopes to investigate beta cells during the context of COVID-19. And so your beta cells are the only cells in your body that's capable of making insulin. And so in a normal context, beta cells secrete insulin into your bloodstream so that your other cells can take in glucose and then convert that to use up for their energy. However, in a diabetic context, your beta cells either fail to produce insulin in type 1 or in type 2 diabetes, they're overworked and stressed out. So they make too much insulin, and then your other cells get insulin resistance, leaving glucose in the bloodstream and then resulting in hyperglycemia and eventually diabetes. And so in relationship to COVID-19, diabetes is a known risk factor for COVID-19, and people who had diabetes pre-existing condition, if they got COVID-19 after, they tend to have worse outcomes. And at the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, where I work, they actually saw a bunch of kids coming in with new onset type 2 diabetes that increased dramatically in 2020. So in 2018 and 2019, those percentages were about 9% and 3%, but in 2020, it was 20%. And so we were wondering is it just because restrictions, we were in a lockdown, so kids couldn't come in and see their doctors, and then there was an influx increasing that percentage? Well, there is a registry that has been established called the COVID Diab, where clinicians all over the world can input cases of people who are not pre-diabetic or who weren't prone to diabetes and got diabetic symptoms after getting COVID-19. And so there are hundreds of cases like this, and not just in kids. And so of course we wanted to ask, does COVID-19 cause diabetes? Well, a lot of other people and our lab has also shown that SARS-CoV-2, the virus responsible for COVID-19, can directly infect beta cells. And so beta cells actually have the receptor for the virus to enter. But what we don't know is, how does that virus affect beta cell structure and function? What is it doing to these cells? And so what we think is that this infection serves as a stressor to compromise beta cell structure and function by reprogramming cellular metabolism. And then you get this vicious cycle leading to hyperglycemia and eventually diabetes. And so how we test that hypothesis is using a non-human primate model. And so rhesus macaques were intranasally inoculated with the virus. And then day 7, we got a pancreatic necropsy sample. Day 12, they actually resolved their mild symptoms. And so this is important because it's reflective for those who get COVID, but don't necessarily get severe symptoms or die from COVID. And so that's most of the population. And then day 14, we get another set of samples. And so what I do is I use different microscopes to look at these samples. And so first, this is a super resolution microscope. What that just means is if I can zoom into these green cells, which are your beta cells that produce insulin as a marker, you can see that in the acute and post-acute, which was day 7 and day 14, there are a lot of empty spaces where the insulin is supposed to be. So you can see there's a significant decrease in the amount of insulin in these cells. And these cells are supposed to have insulin. That's the main purpose of their what they do. And so I wanted to see what was happening inside these cells. And in order to do that, I used something called electron microscopy. It has a very high resolution where I can see up to 5 microns. And so in the control, you can see all these little black dots. Those are all insulin vesicles. And this huge blob here in the acute to day 7 is a nucleus. And so on the acute, you can see there's less insulin granules already, just in the zoomed out version. When you zoom in, it has hallmarks of beta cell stress. So in the ER, it's supposed to be long and thin. However, in the acute, it's a little bit more dilated, indicating ER stress. Another indicator of stress is hypervacuolization. And so in the infected samples, we see a lot of these empty spaces. And so there's a lot of white spaces where contributing to hypervacuolization. Lastly, in a textbook mitochondria, it's supposed to look like this: condensed, ordered, and elongated. However, in the infected samples, you can see that they're more swollen and they're not ordered. They look messed up. And so yes, the virus is altering the insides of the beta cells. And so lastly, I wanted to see what a metabolic profile would look like. And so with this FLIM, fluorescence lifetime imaging, each molecule can have a lifetime. And so just for example, bound and free NADH, which represents oxidative phosphorylation, which is what your body normally goes through to make energy. And then glycolysis are less efficient. So diabetics actually go towards more glycolytic profile. So you just need to know that in this circle, oxphos is here and glycolysis is over here. And so I have my insulin cells, the beta cells, and then I can take an image of the NADH autofluorescence and tell you that, hey, more red is more oxphos or more blue is more glycolysis. And so in the control, you can see there's more red, meaning that there's more oxphos happening, which is normal. However, in the infected samples, there's more blue. So these infected samples have more glycolysis. And you can see that shift towards the right. So more glycolysis is actually happening within this circle, which is what we call a phasor plot. And then you can, of course, quantify that data, which is what all scientists love. And you can see an increase in percent of free NADH. So that just means there's a significant shift towards glycolysis. And so hopefully I have been able to convince you that, yes, since we see that SARS-CoV-2 directly infects beta cells, what's happening is that this stressor causes beta cell degranulation. So that means there's not enough insulin in the beta cells, an indicator of beta cell dysfunction. Does that mean they can't secrete insulin, or does that mean they can't make any, or both? And then I showed you that they have altered beta cell ultrastructure, which means that these are indicators of different kinds of stressors, different pathways are getting messed up. And then lastly, there's a shift towards a glycolytic profile. And so even though I mentioned that diabetics go through more glycolysis, this virus is actually known to reprogram cell metabolism in other cell types, such as the kidney cells and lung cells, and it reprograms cell metabolism to make more of itself. And so we hope to continue to keep going on to see whether or not eventually this injury for the beta cells eventually causes diabetes, because your beta cells actually cannot regenerate until about every 6 years. So any hit to your beta cells now and then challenging it with diet or some other stressor can eventually cause diabetes. And so this is a huge collaborative project that I've been doing since, of course, COVID started. And I just wanted to thank everyone who's part of that. I want to thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.